at all. And every one of Donald Trump's letters to these countries, every one of them in the last line says, and I, Donald Trump, can change any of these tariffs at any time, depending on, and this is the word he uses, our relationship with that country.
There was a time when allies stood close. Canada and Japan weren't just trading partners. They were pillars in America's global architecture, steady, reliable, and aligned. But today, those pillars are shifting. On July 10th, President Donald Trump announced a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, effective August 1st. Just days earlier, Japan received notice of a 25% blanket tariff on its exports to the United States. These weren't isolated decisions. They were part of a larger pattern, one defined by disruption, volatility, and personal leverage. Allies who once believed in a stable trans-Pacific order are now asking a difficult question. If trust is gone, what's left to hold them here?
Trump goes on to say in that letter that if Canada raises its tariffs, quote, whatever number you choose to raise them by will be added onto the 35% that we charge.
Donald Trump's trade policy in 2025 has followed no conventional rulebook. Instead of structured trade frameworks, the president has relied on unilateral letters, announcing tariffs, shifting deadlines, and warning partners that duties could change based on the relationship. For Canada, the escalation has been relentless. After facing tariffs on aluminum, steel, and copper earlier this year, the new 35% duty stunned businesses across sectors. It came even as Canada was still in active bilateral negotiations with Washington, talks that were expected to conclude by July 21st. Rather than escalate publicly, Prime Minister Mark Carney chose a quieter path. Behind closed doors, his team worked to contain the fallout, while simultaneously moving Canada's economic focus outward. Canada has intensified trade negotiations with ASEAN, and in July, its foreign minister confirmed progress on a new free trade agreement. At the same time, Ottawa signed a defense and intelligence sharing pact with Tokyo, expanding security coordination in the Indo-Pacific. In Japan, the response has been firmer, but no less strategic. The 25% tariff letter from Washington triggered strong language from Tokyo. The Japanese government rejected what it called economic coercion and emphasized its commitment to protect domestic industries and employment. Yet even as negotiations with the U.S. continue, Japan is not waiting. Its economic ministers are expanding ties with Southeast Asia and Europe, reinforcing partnerships that don't come with strings attached. Taken together, the message is clear. Trump's tariff. First diplomacy is no longer just a tactic. It's become a turning point. And it's pushing countries to build new bridges beyond Washington.
And I am here, the Carney government's first visit to the Indo-Pacific, my first visit to the Indo-Pacific, to stress the importance of multilateralism. Multilateralism in trade and economic matters in particular.
Japan and Canada have taken a major step forward in deepening their strategic ties by signing a security information sharing agreement.
The Indo-Pacific is no longer just a strategic concept. It's becoming a new center of gravity for countries seeking balance, stability, and multilateral cooperation. For Canada, that means finalizing its FTA with ASEAN, strengthening LNG exports to Asia, and leveraging its role as a supplier of critical minerals. In the past month, Canadian LNG shipments have reached Malaysia, while Ottawa continues to court Petronas and other Asian energy players. Japan, meanwhile, is reinforcing its defense ties across the region and pushing for tighter cooperation with ASEAN nations, including Vietnam and Indonesia. Both nations, longtime U.S. allies, are now rebalancing. Not in protest, but out of necessity. Because in today's climate, diversification isn't just smart, it's essential. Trump promised 90 deals in 90 days. But what the world has seen are 90 days of confusion. Letters sent, tariffs threatened, and no binding agreements in sight. In that void, trust is eroding. Canada and Japan aren't turning hostile, they're adapting. Quietly, pragmatically, and with long-term interests in mind. What's emerging isn't anti-American. It's post-American. A world where allies still value U.S. partnership but no longer build their future around it. Because allies don't wait forever. And when tariffs replace trust, the world moves on.
President Trump ratcheting up the tariff war with a measure that could be another big blow to Canada. Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on copper.
Of course, our embassy in Washington is following very closely, as well as the entire team back in Ottawa.
On July 9th, President Donald Trump announced a new 50% tariff on all copper imports into the United States. The policy takes effect August 1st and has already sent shockwaves through global supply chains. But while much of the world is reacting with uncertainty, one neighbor isn't panicking. Canada isn't shouting, it's watching. Because for Ottawa, this isn't just another tariff. It's a test of strategy and of how far Trump is willing to go before Canada decides to push back. In 2023, Canada exported 9.3 billion Canadian dollars worth of copper and copper-based products, according to Statistics Canada. Over half, about 4.8 billion, went to the United States. That trade now sits on the edge of a cliff. Canadian producers fear that if no exemption is reached, their products will become instantly uncompetitive compared to US-based suppliers. Some Canadian exporters, especially those who shifted into copper during earlier rounds of US metal tariffs, now find themselves back under threat. For businesses that rely on the US for a fifth of their sales, the prospect of a 50% tariff could mean lost contracts, layoffs, or even full market exit. This isn't an abstract policy debate. It's the real cost of losing access to a partner that, for decades, served as Canada's largest customer for critical minerals.
If you were to ask Donald Trump that question, I guess he would say he's answered it today in his Truth Social post that he wants to rebuild the American copper industry.
Trump's reasoning is clear: rebuild America's industrial base. In a social post, he framed copper as vital to the future, powering everything from electric vehicles to military systems and data centers. But unlike aluminum or steel, the U.S. still relies heavily on foreign copper. It takes years to build new smelters or expand mining operations. In the short term, manufacturers will face higher prices, and consumers may feel the effects in products that touch nearly every part of modern life. To Canada, this doesn't look like industrial policy. It looks like leverage, a pressure tactic to bring negotiating partners to the table. And the deadline, August 1st, is now a countdown clock for everyone involved.
Being said, every single journalist in the country wants to have more information about the negotiations. The same. We will let the Prime Minister do the negotiation, supported, of course, by our negotiator-in-chief back in Washington, Kirsten Holman, and we will not negotiate in public.
Yet Canada isn't moving publicly. Not yet. Industry Minister Melanie Joly says there is still no executive order, but confirms that Ottawa and the Canadian Embassy in Washington are following very closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney has not responded publicly, a pattern that reflects his cautious, behind-the-scenes style. Canada's lead negotiator, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, is working in Washington to secure an outcome before the window closes. The government's focus, Joly says, is on protecting workers and supporting companies at the front line of this trade war, from aluminum and steel now to copper. Canada's goal is simple: secure a carve-out, a specific exemption for copper under a broader bilateral agreement. It's not unprecedented. Canada has achieved similar deals in the past. But this time, the pressure is higher. The self-imposed deadline is July 21st. That gives Carney's team less than 2 weeks to finalize a trade and security agreement with the U.S. before the tariffs hit. Donald Trump's strategy is loud. The announcements come via social media, the targets are clear, and the deadlines are firm. Canada's strategy is quieter, but not weaker. Every move is measured. Every response is calculated. As August 1st approaches, the world will watch whether Canada bends or negotiates its way out. In this trade war, timing is power. And while Trump holds the microphone, Carney is holding the clock.
We denounce these illegal tariffs, and we think that they're a direct attack against our workers and now on in the copper industry, and so we'll fight against them.
At first, Canada waited, but now it has broken its silence. Industry Minister Melanie Joly publicly denounced the measure, calling it illegal under international trade rules and a direct attack on Canadian workers. Behind the scenes, Joly has been meeting with executives from major mining firms like Glencore and Teck Resources, as well as union leaders. Canada is no longer in observation mode. It is preparing to respond. And this moment is about more than copper. It's about whether rules still matter in the world's most important trading relationship.
So Glencore and them, those are Canadian companies that both mine copper. A tariff to this critical mineral would be a blow to Canada.
The anger is rooted not just in economics, but in disruption. Canada exports a significant volume of copper to the US, and for regions like Quebec, that trade is tightly linked to jobs and production. Even provinces that sell more to Asia are now caught in a cycle of volatility. For producers, it's no longer about adjusting to new policies. It's about navigating a climate where long-term planning is nearly impossible, and where every morning could bring another shock. For the Trump administration, disruption is the point. The copper tariff, like the steel and aluminum tariffs before it, is being imposed under Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, on the grounds of national security. But few believe copper from Canada threatens U.S. security. In fact, many experts say the real target is China, the world's largest supplier of refined copper. By hitting all exporters equally, the U.S. creates a broad web of pressure. The goal is simple: force countries to sign new bilateral trade agreements, or risk being left out entirely. This tactic now has a name in Washington: Liberation Day tariffs. Over 20 countries have received letters warning them of impending duties. Even allies like Japan and South Korea weren't spared. Canada was, for a time, left off the list. But with the copper tariff now confirmed, it's clear: no one is fully safe. And for Canada, this tariff lands in the middle of a fragile negotiation.
The idea here for Canada is just to get back to respect for the trade agreement that President Trump himself negotiated, in his first term.
As the U.S. pushes forward, Canada is shifting from patience to preparation. Ottawa's approach has not been loud, but it has been deliberate. Over the past 2 weeks, Canada has ramped up internal consultations across ministries, provinces, and industries, especially in regions like Quebec and Ontario, where the impact could be immediate. Minister Joly's meetings with Glencore and Teck Resources weren't symbolic. They were the start of response planning. And that planning now comes with a clear timeline. Canada has tied its response to July 21st, giving both sides less than 2 weeks to find a resolution. If no agreement is reached by then, retaliation is firmly on the table. Steel tariffs are among the options, ones Canada has used before and is prepared to use again. Behind the scenes, the message is clear: if diplomacy stalls, countermeasures won't. This is not just a story about copper. It's a story about trust and how easily it can be broken. Trump may see tariffs as tools of leverage, but allies see them as weapons used without warning. And that shift, from partner to target, could have long-term consequences. Canada isn't folding, but it also isn't escalating yet. What happens in the next 10 days could decide whether North America remains a free trade zone or falls deeper into a spiral of tit-for-tat protectionism. And in this moment, the question isn't just whether Canada will fight back, it's whether the rules that built the global trade system can survive another round of shock.